Hey, Brian, and you're very welcome. Thanks for joining us. I'm
Oh, it's my
absolutely
pleasure.
looking absolutely looking forward to this one. And I would imagine most people that will watch or listen to this will know who you are. I want to spend a bit of time in your life story because it's an interesting one.
Was pretty much always into science and math, and I
Mm.
decided when I read a book on gene therapy in the eighth grade that I was going to be a molecular biologist. According to that book, gene therapy was right around the corner. I guess it took a little bit longer than anticipated because it's only now entering the mainstream therapy space. But
We're not going to say
I
how
got
long ago that was, though, Brian, right?
no. It got me excited though, and it got me thinking about molecular biology, and I just kind of never looked back. I'm not sure that was a intelligent way to do things in retrospect, because eighth grade was probably not the time to make careers. It worked out okay.
And as an Irish person, can you tell me? I know I should know this, but eighth grade is what age, roughly?
13, yeah, yeah,
Oh, wow, okay.
13.
And that was the decision that this is the path you're going to follow.
Yeah, I remember
Jeez.
reading that book. I don't know why I chose biology. Man, my father was a chemistry teacher, my mother was a math teacher, so I guess it was a little bit ordained that I was going to stay in the area.
And the basketball, you were the next Michael Jordan at one stage, or was that
Well, I
slightly
never
exaggerated?
never got to that level, and I should have looked at the height of my parents and realized that there were better paths. I got into golf
So,
too, but it was a little too late for the PGA Tour. So,
well, there's still
you
hope.
know,
I mean, that's the industry we're working in, right? Um,
if we
but
reverse aging enough, I'm going to go back and train for the tour. Yeah, it's my goal.
yeah, and also we can get enough regenerative products out there. Maybe we can get Tiger Woods or these guys back into their primes, despite the injuries and despite the age profile.
Yeah,
That would
yeah,
be
it's a good goal.
he's got a bit of money to support the endeavors. Um,
Exactly.
so you go to college. We'll have to dip into this for a second because where you
Yeah,
went.
I went to Northwestern University, very cold, short, north of Chicago on the Lake Michigan. Uh,
Okay. In the
did a
postgraduate.
math and a biochemistry major there, and then I went to MIT to do my research. That's where I started doing research on aging in the biology department.
Okay. So again, without digging into, we won't make this an Oprah Winfrey kind of an emotional, Brian is crying type episode. But I know your kind of attitude and your willingness to do stuff is linked to an accident. Is that something you speak briefly? You can
Yeah,
this could be one
so
sentence
between
answer or
college,
yeah.
between university and the PhD studies, I got in a car accident, got hit by a drunk driver, and spent 6 months in a wheelchair and a couple weeks on a ventilator. It was a bit of a dodgy experience. I wasn't sure that I was going to survive, but it really sort of changed my personality, and it made me more sort of carefree in an odd sort of way, because I guess I realized that something bad could happen at any time. So I might as well do what I want to do in life and see what's possible. And so it really sort of opened my mind and made life a lot easier, actually, because I stopped doubting myself and worrying about what was going to happen. So,
Isn't that obviously I've heard that story before in detail, and it's an awful ordeal for you, but I think we all benefited somewhat from that because you've pushed the field forward, and maybe you would have done that anyway, but there's a liberation, I guess, that comes from
yeah,
something like
I
that.
mean, there have been a lot of us through the years that have tried to promote this field, but it's great to see it moving forward, because I feel like that we're really starting to have an impact on human health now, and it's maybe not as widespread as we'd like at the moment. It's in clinics and diagnostic companies and things like that at the moment. So it's reaching a relatively small segment of the population, supplements, but it's growing, and so I'm hoping that we can democratize longevity so that everybody gets a chance to have a longer health span.
Brilliant. So you're in MIT, and the lab you're in has become almost legend now at this stage. So can you just tell us? Well, what I'd like to know is tell everyone who the characters were that were involved, but also, did you have any idea on what you were doing and the impact that might have in the future?
Yeah, so I get to this lab, and there's another graduate student whose name was Nick Austriaco, and we were debating going to this lab, and Lenny Garenti's lab, who was he was doing transcription research at the time, not aging.
Hmm.
And I think he was at a stage of his career where he wanted to go in a new direction. And so we worked in yeast cells, which are single-celled organisms. And he was like, this find something interesting and new to do in yeast. And we came up with two ideas. One was aging, which is sounded a bit crazy because the idea that a single-celled organism would age in the same way that a human would didn't seem likely. And the other idea we had was to maybe do apoptosis, which is programmed cell death, why cells will kill themselves sometimes under certain circumstances. And that sounded even more implausible because since a single-celled organism, why would it kill itself? Yeah,
Yeah,
like a human might want to kill
it's
some
nice.
of your cells to
Anyway,
keep them from becoming cancer or something, but didn't seem to
yeah,
make sense there. Turns out there's a whole field on apoptosis in yeast too. So in either way we would have gone, I think it would have been okay. But we chose aging, and we published the first paper on sirtuins and aging. Then I got published a few more papers, and we got our PhDs. And Nick went on to become a priest, and so he's a priest biologist now in the Philippines.
wow,
And I went to do a postdoc in cancer tumor suppressor research. Um,
holy
but
moly.
that lab trained a lot of people. You know, Matt Caberline was there, David Sinclair was there, Brad Johnson, David Lombard. You know, I could go on and on. Shelley Berger. I could go on and on and on about the number of people in that longevity field that came from that lab.
And
So it was a very exciting place.
that's unreal. It is literally legendary at this point, that lab. If
Well, you
you
know,
were
it's
to
partly
explain,
because Lenny went out of his way to promote people that were successful in his lab getting independent positions. You know,
yeah,
not every PI is that helpful to their students and their postdocs, but Lenny really made that a point of emphasis. And so, you know, he probably put more researchers in the aging field than anybody I know.
that's incredible. And tell me, if you were to explain Sirtuins and their roles to people who had never come across any of this before, in brief, could you do that? And also, what did you learn from yeast
Yeah.
relating
Well,
Sirtuins to aging?
the remarkable thing is that the pathways that govern aging in yeast are at least overlapping with the pathways that govern aging in humans. The sirtuin pathway, the mTOR pathway, we found that in yeast as well. And it's really proven that species age in very similar ways, which is a bit surprising because the thought process about aging is that it's really kind of what happens after natural selection goes away. So there's a lot of selective pressure to keep you healthy when you're young, but very few people live past the age of 40 in antiquity. People were dying for all kinds of other reasons, infections, childbirth, etc. Aging wasn't a big issue. And so there was a lot of natural selection to keep you functional until you had kids and had the next generation, because that's what defines fitness. But after that, you know, maybe there's just the selective pressure goes down and your body falls apart. And that some of that, a lot of that may be true, but if it's true, it means that different species, the way we age is the way we fall apart is very similar, and the same pathways are involved. So it's been useful to use things like yeast and worms to understand human aging. The sirtuin pathway, these proteins are protein deacetylases. So they modify the activity of other proteins, including histones, which are the proteins that pack DNA in the cell, in the nucleus. And their activity is strongly linked to aging, keeping people healthy as they get older. And so if you activate these sirtuins, I'm thinking not only SIRT1, but SIRT3 and SIRT6, they have different targets that they deacetylate, and that promotes healthspan.
Where are that concept? Where is that in terms of, application now? Are there
Yeah.
methods
So
to do this?
there have been several supplements that have developed that supposedly activate sirtuins. One of them was resveratrol, although I'm a little bit skeptical about that, to be honest.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there are these enzymes use NAD as a substrate. NAD is a metabolite in the cell that goes down with aging, and it's central to cellular metabolism. And so now there's different ways you can try to supplement your NAD levels back up with aging, including taking things like nicotinamide mononucleotide or NMN or
Yeah.
nicotinamide riboside NR, or you can take NAD sublingually now directly. And if you supplement NAD levels up, it's going to have many effects on your body, one of which is to increase the activity of these sirtuins.
Holy shit. Okay, so I wanted to come to one question that you, or one phrase that I heard you say. I was going to come to this a little bit later in my simple plan that I had for this. But I heard you say that 25 years ago, if someone had asked you where we'd be now, you thought that we would have, great understanding of aging, but no way of affecting it. And you find that it's kind of the opposite.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate, please?
Well, aging, is an incredibly complex process. Different things are happening in different cells and tissues. And, there have been all these papers on hallmarks and pillars of aging, defining different pathways that control the aging process. If you were to read that, you might say, wow, it's so complicated. There's no way to develop a single molecule that's going to affect that whole process. But I think that's thinking about it wrong. I think that
Mm.
what we really are is a homeostatic system. We have a complicated set of biology that keeps us healthy, and it's designed to keep us healthy as long as possible. And there's a lot of crosstalk between cells and pathways. It's a network, basically.
Yeah.
And when that network breaks down, then depending on your individual susceptibility, you might get different diseases, cardiovascular disease, or you might get Alzheimer's or cancer. But as long as the network is functioning, it largely protects you. And so that's why we can find interventions that slow aging, because they really just preserve the network function. They're key nodes in the network that if you can preserve them, you can keep the network functioning longer. And then the output of that is the body's just generally healthier because it's maintaining homeostasis. So it's turned out that so that's my theory of aging, which is sounds good at that level, but when you go to the next level, we still don't understand how that network functions. So we still lack a lot of understanding of aging. But it also means that there's a process you can modify that has systemic effects. And so molecules like rapamycin or NAD or AKG or others probably hit those nodes and preserve that network. And so it's easier to slow aging than anybody thought, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and actually, I think it's going to be easier to slow aging because you're preserving a system in place than it is to try to treat a disease. Because once you get into a chronic disease state, you're in a disequilibrium. Your body's not functioning in that homeostasis anymore. And trying to go from that disequilibrium back to equilibrium is much more difficult than trying to take a system that is more or less in equilibrium and maintaining it there. So I think that's why it's so hard to treat disease. Once these networks fall apart, it's hard to put things back together.
That's an astounding statement. If I'm a politician or I'm anyone that has anything to do with purse strings, that should really hit home because we don't spend money on aging research. We don't spend money really on prevention. But the fact that it may be, if we're looking at years of life and we're looking at years of health, and if we want to get into the kind of economic element of that, which, there's papers that discuss just how much it costs for an additional healthy life or how much you save. Um, the logic of being able to maintain something being easier than trying to repair it across that nodes, and the fact that there are so many different things that can hit these nodes means that this is an open door that we really should be funding.
Yeah, it really is. This is an argument that we've been making for 20 years, but I think when we started making the argument, we weren't sure. I'm convinced now that it's possible to slow aging, keep people healthy longer. And the quality of life benefits and the economic benefits that come from that are hard to describe. They're so high.
Yeah.
So it's the ultimate win-win, but it takes, politicians and regulatory bodies that are willing to be innovative and be disruptive and try new things. And the system is so entrenched and siloed in healthcare that it's
Yeah.
really hard to break those boundaries. That's been a challenge.
Yeah, and it is, like you say, the healthcare system. It does feel like if we designed, mechanics or garages or something where you brought your car to one place to look at the wheel and somewhere else to look at the engine and somewhere else to look at the, So it's designed almost in opposition to what you're discussing, this systemic
Uh,
approach.
and I think that's historical. It's
Yeah,
science was always very reductionist. Let's break it down into the pieces and the organs and the tissues and the specific diseases and specialize, have the medical specialize in one thing or another. And there's value to that, certainly. I mean, we need
yeah,
to treat diseases. But I think aging is kind of in opposition to that. It's really trying to think about it as a system. And
yeah.
it's neither the research or the clinical care is optimized for that.
Fascinating. It is fascinating that so many things are showing that they can have an impact. In that equilibrium, I asked this question to somebody else I was speaking to on this kind of simplistic view of these things. In that equilibrium maintenance, do you hold any hope for reprogramming as which almost sort of disagrees, or is a way to shortcut that if it is regenerative as we feel?
Yeah, I mean, well, one of the things that happens with aging is and that breaks this homeostasis is you're losing adult stem cells to be able to differentiate and replace cells that are getting damaged. You're always replacing cells that are getting damaged, but the
Yeah,
ability to do that declines with aging. And so if you can reprogram cells back to a more stem-like state, you can restore that pool of cells that can replenish damaged ones. So I think there's a huge amount of potential there. There's a lot we don't know about it, especially when we try to take it therapeutically.
yeah,
Um, and but fortunately, there's a lot of great scientists working on it. I definitely think it's one of the most promising areas in the longevity space, although it may not be ready for prime time just yet.
yeah, yeah. It's fascinating. And that's like, am I right in saying that? Because I take this stem cell point, but am I right in saying that there's a bit of a de-aging element to that that may not be the route that you would get by looking at the homeostasis and all these different things that can try to
Yeah.
maintain the spinning plates, kind of.
Yeah, I think if you is one of the few potential
Works.
ways I can see that you might be able to really reverse aspects of aging.
Yeah,
And of course, stem cells are not the only thing driving aging. If you could, it sort of raises the question, if you could fully restore the ability of cells to replenish tissues, would that solve the aging problem completely or solve 20% of the aging problem? I don't think we know the answer to that, but certainly I think it would have a big impact. And it has, you know, potential to really restore aging or restore youth in some elements. There's sort of three ways to think about things. You can keep people healthy longer, but they still die at 120. You can
yeah,
slow aging so that maximum lifespan goes up, or you could stop or reverse aging. I don't think we have anything that's in that stop or reverse aging category right now. I'm not sure any of the interventions we're studying right now will dramatically increase the maximum lifespan either. I don't know. It's a hypothesis. I think a lot of them are going to give people extra health, but may not extend the maximum that much. So, but that's everybody thinks differently about that. We really don't know the answer in humans. We know what can happen in animal models. And in some cases there we can extend maximum lifespan, although there's no evidence I've seen that you can really reverse aging. So,
okay. Just to get back to the Brian Kennedy life story, then you take up a position in the book. If you can very briefly discuss that, what the facility is, some of the programs you started, maybe, and then look at the pivot into Singapore. And without asking you to do too much at once, I'd love to know what programs you've got going on in Singapore and the kind of infrastructure that's there as well.
the Buck is a fascinating place. It was really probably the first, independent research institute focused solely on the biology of aging. Certainly the biggest for many years, and really ahead of its time. And it benefited and also suffered from that because the funding going into aging research has always been quite low at the government level and also at the philanthropic and investment levels. And trying to keep that institute functioning largely on NIH grants was difficult. But I think it was really worth doing because a lot of major insights in aging have come from research that have gone at the Buck. And now that there's a lot more philanthropic and investor interest, I still don't think there's enough government interest in what's happening at the NIH under the current administration is something that I'm happy to discuss if you like. I think there's funding from other avenues that is really driving the longevity field, and hopefully it's helping the buck. I stayed there 7 years, and then I really wanted to get more into clinical research. And moving to National University of Singapore was a good opportunity to do that because there's a really advanced hospital and clinical research program here, and we could really start trying to target aging in humans. So we run a program here now that's quite large. There's about 35 faculty focused on different aspects of aging. And directly in the context of aging, we have all the model organisms that we can either study preclinically interventions that might slow aging or test them in the clinic in humans. So there's a lot of AI going on now to develop biologic aging clocks and some stem cell research. So it's a really exciting program I think we have going here in US. And I should also just briefly mention that we have another center on ovarian aging that we're really focused on what's going on in ovaries and why that causes a loss of fertility and menopause and what the downstream effects of menopause are in women. So that's another, I think, rich vein of research.
Amazing. And in the context of Singapore, then, if I don't know, I won't say the American government, though we can come back to that in a second. But if I'm the Irish government and I'm looking at, or the French government or whatever, and I'm looking at Singapore, to me, it's a lot of foresight to bring you to their facility as one of the, I don't know, top handful of people in the world in this field, and to kind of give the mechanisms or the levers of their society to some extent for this research. Are they going to steal a march on these other countries? Is there an argument that this should be replicated, that we should have these
I hope
institutions?
that Yeah, I hope, sorry to interrupt. I hope Singapore really becomes the leader in this because it's an optimal place to really test how far we can push healthspan. It's a population, it's a strong government, strong healthcare system, population that largely believes in their government. And so you could really take interventions that work to slow aging and push them into the community and have a big impact on health span here. So I think the opportunities here. The government was really one of the first to really understand the aging problem. I mean, they were talking about this a long time ago. And, it's a big problem here. You have a quarter of the population over 65 and only two workers for every retired person. So it's, ground zero in a way for what's going on with the aging demographics. But they've taken their time to try to figure out what the right strategy is for that, and I think they're really beginning to focus on healthy longevity. If they really want to be innovative and tackle that problem, I think they can be the leader. I'm not the least nationalist person I know. I don't care who does it. It's if Ireland wants to get in the lead of Singapore, that's great too. But I think Singapore has a huge opportunity in front of it.
That's very interesting. So you think that the funding situation in the States might be problematic at the moment,
Well,
or?
look, I mean, I think we have an administration in charge now that disregards truth, that doesn't seem to value science, and they portrayed scientists as the villains of the pandemic when they were the heroes, And so I think that the it's impossible to say what they're going to do, but there have been threats to seriously cut NIH funding. Certain universities' funding has already been cut. I know faculty working on aging at the University of Columbia and also at Harvard that are getting their grants cut for no reason. Um, if you stop valuing science and knowledge, you're going to pay a long-term price for that, and it's going to slow down development of treatments for disease. It's going to slow down healthy longevity, and it's just, to me, fundamentally and morally wrong when a country with that much economic value is not willing to put an emphasis on understanding how the world works and developing innovation to help people live longer, happier lives.
Is there an exodus of scientists potentially?
Yes.
Yeah.
Many, many American scientists or scientists in the United States are looking to leave. There's no doubt about that. It's not only foreign-born scientists that are looking to leave too. I'm hearing from American-born scientists that are saying, "I don't think my country cares about science anymore. I need to go find somewhere that does." And so, look, the NIH is the model. It drove medical biomedical research in the U.S. above any other country in the world. And the National Institute of Aging was one of the few ones that ever really funded aging research in the world. So aging research in the US was also way ahead of anywhere else. And the innovations that come from these things have been disproportionately in the US because of it.
Yeah.
But you have to, if you're not going to keep making that commitment and you're not going to value what science says instead of what you want science to say, then there's a problem. And so I am concerned about what's happening in the country I was born in, for sure.
Okay. Again, I would imagine there are other countries maybe trying to put this podcast together and see the opportunity to work in this field, the potential interventions, the potential economic and societal impact, and maybe also the potential for, not that you want scientists to have to leave, obviously, but there must be a lack of security in tenure now that is affecting an awful lot of people.
Yeah.
And hopefully that's remedied. That would be the best way of doing it. And let's do good science in every part of the world. If it leads to an exodus, maybe
Well,
politicians can also listen and try to welcome some of these people to conduct these trials and these studies in their countries.
it's also an opportunity, I
Yeah,
mean, if you look at like the Middle East, they're get heavily investing in healthy longevity.
yeah,
Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Saudi Arabia,
yeah,
Oman to some extent. These countries have seen the problem and they're trying to take the lead in technology to do something about it. So I think that, if you're trying to develop a scientific program and you're looking at your aging problem, and every country has one at different levels,
yeah,
then this is a time to really invest in that and say, how can we contribute to solving this probably the biggest medical challenge of the 21st century?
yeah.
Uh, so, one country's problems is another country's opportunities.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but yeah. So I've only got two questions remaining. One, I don't know why, but I ask different guests if they were king for a day. Thing is, you probably are the closest we'll get to a king, but
Yeah.
King Brian of the Kennedys. The next 5 to 10 years, if you were given control of all the levers of funding and power and everything else that's required to move this forward, what would you do? What would be the change you'd make? What would be, the thing that you feel would expedite this the most? Be ambitious now because you're complete ruler of all funding.
Well, I think we need to devote more funding to the longevity research. Of course, I would say that, but we still spend 1,000 times as much on cancer research as aging research.
Yeah,
And cancer is only affecting a third of the population. Aging is affecting everybody. It's intrinsic to humans. The kinds of questions like, is aging inevitable? Can we stop it? Can we reverse it? Can we implement it? Healthy longevity interventions are the most important questions I can think about in biology for right now. And so we're still ignoring them at a from a big perspective. We're not putting the effort into trying to understand this. I would say that I'm really impressed with where the translation's going in the field. There's a lot of clinics, there's a lot of longevity companies, biotechs, diet supplements. We need to fund that basic science at the same level, and that's not happening right now because the big questions aren't answered. And if we don't, support the people at the universities and other places that have wild ideas that may have no application, we don't know right now, but they're cool ideas, then we're never going to get to the as far as we want to go in any biomedical area. And I think that if you look back, many of the big discoveries in biomedical areas are not related to what the original question was.
yeah.
CRISPR is a good example of that. And so we need to let people be inquisitive and we need to realize that knowledge for knowledge's sake is tremendously valuable. And I think we're forgetting that right now. So I would like make, I guess, funding for knowledge sake questions at least as important as the translation for current knowledge into practice.
Brilliant. It is kind of foundational to to the exercise of education anyway, like the commercial pursuit of education. I can recall us discussing this in Ireland in the beginning of the 2000s, that if we were to pursue that purely, we would have, in a population of 5 million people, we'd have 1 million real estate agents at that point, because that's where all commercial activity was taking place. And education does follow sometimes the trends of the professions and the industries that are booming. But obviously that wouldn't have been the best idea we ever had. And yeah, the funding of basic research, especially in areas that we're not that, well versed in what's going on, is a great claim. Okay, the last question is just anything planned for the trip to Dublin? Any particular requests? Are you going
Oh,
fishing or
I don't know. You tell me. Should I bring the golf clubs or not?
bring the golf clubs and a fishing rod, and we'll figure something out.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
Brian, brilliant to talk to you, and thanks very much for your time. We will see you in Dublin, and we'll see you again soon, hopefully.
Anytime. Looking forward to the trip.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please do subscribe to the channel. You can follow, rate us. You can also add comments so that we can engage in a conversation from here. Stay tuned to all of our social media notifications as we give you more updates about the Longevity Summit Dublin and about the podcast itself. Until next time.